A millionaire adopts a homeless black boy, but 7 years later, that boy repays him with something no amount of money could buy. At first, it was just an act of charity, but as their lives intertwined, the past resurfaced, revealing a shocking truth that would change everything. What did the boy give him in return? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn evening cast long shadows across the polished windows of La Table Royale, the most exclusive restaurant in the city's financial district. Henry Winston's sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb precisely at 7 p.m., just as it did every Thursday evening. The chauffeur hurried to open the door, and Henry emerged, his tailored charcoal suit as crisp as his expression. At 52, Henry carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who had built an empire through sheer determination. His silver-streaked dark hair was perfectly groomed, and his steel-gray eyes held the calculated gaze of a man who measured everything in terms of profit and loss. The restaurant's heavy glass doors swung open before he reached them. "Good evening, Mr. Winston," the maitre d' said, bowing slightly. "Your usual table is ready, sir." The staff moved with practiced efficiency, their actions carefully choreographed from countless Thursday evenings just like this one. A young waitress nearly dropped her tray when Henry passed, earning a sharp look from her supervisor. Everyone knew Mr. Winston expected perfection. He had sent back entire meals if a single garnish was out of place. The corner table, partially secluded by an elegant partition of frosted glass, waited for him like a throne. Henry settled into his chair, immediately adjusting its position exactly 2 inches to the left. The leather creaked softly beneath him as he surveyed his domain through half-lidded eyes. "Your usual aperitif, sir?" the sommelier asked, hovering at a respectful distance. "Yes," Henry replied without looking up, his voice carrying the clipped tone of someone who had long ago tired of unnecessary conversation. His fingers, elegant but strong from years of signing contracts and building his real estate empire, reached for his platinum watch. 7:05, right on schedule. The crisp white napkin found its proper place across his lap, with 2 precise movements. The leather-bound menu opened in his hands, though he had memorized its contents months ago. Through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Henry's eyes drifted across the street, where a small shadow caught his attention. He squinted slightly, his hand pausing mid-turn of a menu page. A figure, small, hunched, moved in the growing darkness near the alley entrance. Something about the silhouette made him pause, but the sommelier returned with his drink, breaking his concentration. Henry dismissed the thought as quickly as it had come, turning his attention back to the menu's familiar pages. The evening proceeded with its usual precision. Each course arrived exactly when it should, each plate arranged with artistic perfection. Henry ate in solitude, his phone face down on the table, one of his few concessions to old-fashioned dining etiquette. When the last plate was cleared and the check presented on a silver tray, Henry removed his black American Express card from his wallet with practiced efficiency. As he waited for the transaction to complete, his gaze drifted once again to the window. This time, the figure across the street was clearer. A young boy, no more than 7, huddled against the brick wall of the alley. Even in the dim light, Henry could see the dark skin of his face, the thin blanket wrapped around small shoulders. The boy's eyes seemed to reflect the restaurant's warm lights, looking in at the world of crystal glasses and fine china with quiet curiosity. Something stirred in Henry's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't quite name. But before the feeling could take root, his signed receipt was returned, and he stood, straightening his suit jacket with a sharp tug. The chauffeur already had the car door open when Henry stepped outside. As he moved to enter the vehicle, his eyes involuntarily found the boy again. For a brief moment, their gazes met across the street, a fraction of a second that somehow felt heavier than it should. Henry ducked into the Mercedes and the door closed with a soft thud. As the car pulled away from the curb, he resolutely fixed his eyes on his phone, pushing away the image of those young eyes that had seemed to look straight through his carefully constructed walls. The following evening, Henry's Mercedes glided to a stop in front of La Table Royale. The autumn air had grown cooler, carrying the crisp scent of fallen leaves. As his chauffeur opened the door, Henry's polished Oxford shoes touched the sidewalk with their usual precise movement. But something made him pause. Across the street, in the same shadowy alcove as yesterday, the boy was there again. The streetlights cast just enough glow to reveal his small frame, still wrapped in that thin blanket. Henry felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, a sensation he quickly dismissed as indigestion from his morning coffee. "Will you be requiring the car at the usual time, sir?" his chauffeur asked. Henry cleared his throat. "Yes, James." 9 o'clock sharp. He straightened his tie, a gesture that usually centered him, but tonight his fingers lingered a moment too long on the silk. Inside, the restaurant's warm lighting and soft classical music enveloped him in its familiar comfort. The maitre d' appeared with his usual deferent smile. "Mr. Winston, welcome back. Your table awaits." As Henry followed the familiar path to his corner seat, fragments of conversation from other diners drifted past him. Terrible about the shelter closing down on 4th Street. More and more people on the streets these days. Right outside our finest restaurants, can you imagine? Henry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He settled into his chair, adjusting it with less precision than usual. The sommelier approached with practiced efficiency, but Henry found himself staring past him, through the window to the spot where the boy sat. "Your usual aperitif, sir?" "I dot." Henry blinked, returning his attention to the restaurant. Yes, of course. Throughout the meal, Henry's routine felt off-kilter. His fork paused halfway to his mouth when he caught sight of the boy sharing a small piece of bread with a pigeon. His wine remained largely untouched as he noticed the child pulling his thin blanket tighter against the evening chill. More conversations filtered through the elegant space. "Did you see that poor child out there? Someone should call social services. In this neighborhood of all places?" Henry's perfectly cooked filet mignon seemed to lose its taste. He found himself pushing the expensive cut around his plate, his appetite diminished by thoughts he couldn't quite suppress. When 9 o'clock approached, Henry signed the check with less than his usual scrutiny. Standing, he adjusted his suit jacket, a gesture that normally signaled the end of another perfectly controlled evening. But tonight something made him linger by the window. The boy had moved slightly, now sitting cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box. A small orange kitten had appeared, its scrawny frame pressing against the child's leg. Henry watched as the boy reached out with gentle hands, sharing what looked like the last bit of his bread with the tiny creature. The sight struck something deep within Henry's carefully ordered world. The boy and the kitten, two forgotten souls finding comfort in each other's company. It painted a picture of companionship that made his own solitary table seem suddenly stark and empty. Henry turned away, his shoulders unusually tense beneath their expensive wool covering. The maitre d' held the door, but Henry's steps were heavier than usual as he walked toward his waiting car. His carefully maintained emotional walls felt just a fraction less solid than they had 24 hours ago. The autumn days marched forward, each evening a carbon copy of the last. Henry maintained his strict routine at La Table Royale, though his attention increasingly drifted to the small figure across the street. Tonight was no different as he sat at his usual table, except that the setting sun cast longer shadows through the restaurant's pristine windows. Midway through his crème brûlée, movement caught his eye. Through the glass, he watched as Noah reached into his tattered jacket and pulled out what appeared to be half a dinner roll, likely found discarded from some cafe. The boy's own stomach growled loud enough that Henry could almost imagine hearing it from inside the restaurant. Yet instead of eating the bread himself, Noah carefully broke it into tiny pieces. The orange kitten appeared from behind a cardboard box, its ribs visible beneath matted fur. Noah's face lit up at the sight of his small friend. With gentle movements, he scattered the bread pieces, making sure the kitten got every crumb. His own hunger seemed forgotten as he watched the tiny animal eat. Henry's dessert spoon froze halfway to his mouth. Something about the scene made his chest tighten uncomfortably. Here was a child with nothing, literally nothing, sharing what little he had with a stray cat. The simple act of kindness struck Henry with unexpected force. He placed his napkin beside his half-finished dessert and stood up, surprising the hovering waiter. His feet carried him toward the door before his brain could catch up with this unprecedented break in routine. A lifetime of carefully maintained emotional distance screamed at him to stop, to return to his table, to maintain the safe isolation he'd built around himself. But for once, Henry ignored those warnings. The cool evening air hit his face as he crossed the street. Noah noticed his approach and quickly gathered the kitten into his arms, holding it protectively against his chest. The boy's eyes, though wary, held a quiet dignity that caught Henry off guard. "Hello," Henry said, his usually commanding voice softening despite himself. Noah didn't respond, but he didn't run either. The kitten purred softly in his arms. "I dot." Henry paused, suddenly uncertain. He hadn't spoken to a child in years. "I noticed you sharing your bread." "Someone's got to look out for her," Noah replied quietly, scratching behind the kitten's ears. "She's all alone." The simple statement hit Henry like a physical blow. He glanced back at the warm lights of La Table Royale, then at the thin boy before him. "Would you—" He cleared his throat. "Would you like to come inside? For a proper meal?" Noah's eyes widened slightly, but suspicion quickly followed. "Why?" "Because—" Henry struggled to find the right words. "Because no one should have to share their dinner with a cat." A ghost of a smile touched Noah's lips. "Can she come too?" He nodded toward the kitten. Henry hesitated, then nodded. "We'll figure something out." Noah stood slowly, still cradling his furry companion. Henry turned toward the restaurant, aware of the boy falling into step beside him. As they approached the entrance, Rafael Perez, the restaurant manager, did a visible double-take. Other diners turned to stare as Henry Winston, known for his rigid solitude, walked through the restaurant with a shabby young boy and a stray kitten in tow. For the first time in years, Henry didn't care what anyone thought of him. Rafael Perez personally guided Henry and Noah to Henry's usual corner table, his professional demeanor barely masking his astonishment. The kitten remained quietly nestled in Noah's arms, as if sensing the need for discretion in such an elegant setting. "Perhaps—" Rafael hesitated, glancing at the kitten. "The young gentleman's friend could rest comfortably here?" He pulled out a plush decorative cushion from a nearby booth and placed it beside their table, partially hidden by the long tablecloth. Noah carefully set the kitten down, who curled up contentedly on the cushion. The boy then climbed into the chair opposite Henry, his eyes wide as he took in the crystal glasses and fine china settings. "Order whatever you'd like," Henry said, passing him a menu. He noticed Noah's hands were clean despite his worn clothes. The boy had obviously made use of the restaurant's bathroom before joining the table. Noah studied the menu with careful concentration. "I don't know what some of these words mean," he admitted quietly. "The chicken marsala is excellent," Henry suggested, pointing to the item. "It comes with mashed potatoes and vegetables." Noah nodded gratefully. "Yes, please." As they waited for their food, Henry found himself studying the boy across from him. There was something in Noah's composure that didn't match his circumstances, a quiet dignity that spoke of better days. "Are you—" Henry paused, uncertain how to phrase his question. "Are you here alone?" Noah's fingers played with the edge of his napkin. "Yes, sir. It's just me now." The now hung heavy in the air between them, but Henry didn't press further. When their food arrived, Noah remembered to place his napkin in his lap and waited for Henry to begin before picking up his own fork. His table manners were impeccable despite his obvious hunger. They ate mostly in silence, broken occasionally by Noah's quiet "thank you" whenever the waiter refilled his water glass. Other diners tried to steal subtle glances at their table, unused to seeing Henry Winston sharing a meal with anyone, let alone a young boy in worn clothes. After the plates were cleared, Henry excused himself and found Raphael near the kitchen entrance. "The boy," Henry said in a low voice. "What do you know about him?" Raphael's usually cheerful face grew serious. "Not much, Mr. Winston. He appeared in the alley about 3 weeks ago. Some of my staff have noticed him sharing scraps with local strays." He hesitated before adding, "He never begs or causes trouble." "Just exists there. We've been concerned, but you know how these situations can be complicated." Henry nodded, a strange heaviness settling in his chest. He'd walked past that alley every evening for weeks, deliberately ignoring what he'd seen. The thought now made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite explain. Returning to the table, Henry found Noah carefully wrapping a dinner roll in a napkin. The boy's face flushed when he realized he'd been caught. "For the kitten," Noah explained quickly. "For later." "Of course," Henry said, his voice gentler than usual. He reached for his wallet and removed several bills. "Here, this is for you and your friend." Noah hesitated before accepting the money, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, sir, for everything." They walked together to the restaurant's entrance, the kitten following close to Noah's heels. In the doorway, Henry found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "You can come back tomorrow evening if you'd like. For dinner." Noah's eyes lit up briefly before careful neutrality returned to his face. "Really?" "Same time," Henry confirmed. "I'll be here." He watched as Noah and the kitten disappeared into the gathering darkness, the boy's silhouette growing smaller against the city lights. Henry stood there longer than usual, one hand still on the restaurant's brass door handle, feeling strangely off balance yet somehow lighter than he had in years. Over the next week, a peculiar rhythm settled into Henry Winston's once predictable life. Each evening at precisely 7 o'clock, Noah Carter would appear at La Table Royale, his small frame wrapped in the same worn clothes but his eyes bright with anticipation. The restaurant staff, who had initially raised eyebrows at this unusual arrangement, now greeted the boy with warm smiles. During their dinners together, Henry Winston found himself slowly emerging from his shell. He watched as Noah carefully handled his silverware, copying Henry's movements with determined precision. Their conversations, though simple, carried a warmth that Henry hadn't experienced in years. "What did you feed the kitten today?" Henry asked one evening, cutting into his steak. Noah's face lit up. "I saved some of my bread from yesterday. She really likes it when I break it into tiny pieces." He demonstrated with the dinner roll on his plate. "I named her Hope because she always comes back even when it's raining." Henry felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of admiration and sadness. Here was a child who had so little, yet gave so freely. The restaurant's other regular patrons had grown accustomed to the unlikely pair. The whispers of judgment had given way to gentle curiosity. Rafael Perez, the manager, often lingered near their table, topping off Henry's water glass more than necessary, his eyes soft with approval. One particularly chilly evening after they had finished their meal, Henry did something unprecedented. "Show me where you stay," he said, his voice gruff with concern. "I'll walk with you." Noah hesitated for a moment before nodding. Together they stepped out into the crisp night air. Henry's polished leather shoes clicked against the pavement as they crossed the street, while Noah's worn sneakers made barely a sound. The alley was exactly what Henry had feared. A makeshift shelter of cardboard boxes lined one wall with a thin blanket, the same one Henry had first noticed, carefully folded inside. Hope the kitten emerged from behind a dumpster, meowing softly at Noah's approach. Henry stood very still, taking in the scene. His throat felt tight. The contrast between this place and his own penthouse apartment struck him like a physical blow. Here was where Noah spent his nights, while Henry slept on Egyptian cotton sheets. "It's not so bad," Noah said quickly, mistaking Henry's silence for judgment. "Hope keeps me company, and the boxes keep most of the wind out." Henry's hands clenched in his coat pockets. Without a word, he shrugged off his expensive wool overcoat and wrapped it around Noah's shoulders. The coat engulfed the boy, nearly reaching his ankles. "Wait here," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. He strode to his waiting car and returned with a shopping bag, one he'd been carrying in his trunk for 2 days, working up the courage to give it to Noah. Inside were a pair of sturdy winter boots, thick socks, and warm gloves. He'd noticed Noah's tattered sneakers days ago, had seen how the boy tucked his hands into his sleeves when the wind blew. Noah stared at the gifts, his fingers trembling as he touched the soft leather of the boots. Nobody's given me new shoes since..." His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. "Try them on," Henry said gruffly, looking away to give the boy a moment to compose himself. Noah sat on a clean patch of concrete, carefully removing his old sneakers. The boots fit perfectly. Henry had been paying attention during their dinners, studying the boy's size when he thought Noah wasn't looking. "Thank you, Mr. Winston," Noah whispered, standing up in his new boots. It's been a really long time since anyone—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Henry nodded, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't quite name. He wanted to offer more, so much more. But something held him back. Not yet. He wasn't ready yet. Hope the kitten rubbed against Noah's legs, purring at his new boots. The sound seemed to fill the quiet alley, a gentle reminder of the simple kindness that had brought them all together. Henry Winston noticed that Noah seemed more subdued than usual during their dinner that evening. The boy pushed his food around the plate, his usual enthusiasm dampened by something weighing on his mind. "Noah," Henry said softly, setting down his fork, "I've been wondering about your family." He watched as Noah's shoulders tensed slightly. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to help if I can." Noah stared at his plate, his fork tracing patterns in the mashed potatoes. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle clink of silverware from nearby tables. "It's okay," Henry added, his voice gentler than he'd ever heard it himself. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." Noah looked up, his eyes searching Henry's face. "It was just me and my mom," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Her name was Charlotte. Charlotte Carter." Henry nodded encouragingly, waiting for Noah to continue. "She was an artist," Noah went on, a small smile touching his lips. "Really good, too. She could make anything beautiful with just a pencil or some paint." His smile faded. "But she got sick. Really sick. The doctors tried to help, but—" Henry felt his chest tighten as Noah's voice trailed off. The boy swallowed hard before continuing. After she was gone, our landlord came. He said we owed too much money." Noah's fingers twisted in his napkin. "He threw all our stuff out on the street. I couldn't carry much, just my backpack, and—" He paused, reaching for his worn backpack beside the chair. Henry watched, his hands clenched under the table, as Noah carefully pulled out something wrapped in what looked like an old t-shirt. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped it. "This was Mom's favorite painting," Noah said, turning the small canvas toward Henry. "She said it was the most important thing she ever painted." Henry's breath caught in his throat. The painting showed a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, sitting at an easel. His face was turned slightly toward the viewer, caught in a moment of pure joy as he worked on his canvas. The brushwork was delicate, capturing not just the likeness but the spirit of the moment. But what made Henry's heart nearly stop was that the young man in the painting was himself, 30 years younger. "Mom said she painted this when she was in art school," Noah explained, his fingers carefully tracing the edge of the canvas. "She told me it was about believing in dreams, about not giving up on what you love." Henry couldn't speak. He remembered that time, remembered the art school where he'd briefly pursued his passion for painting before his father convinced him to focus on business instead. He remembered the shy girl who used to watch him paint, who always had a kind word about his work when others criticized it. Charlotte Thompson, as she'd been known then. How had he never made the connection to Noah's last name? "She kept it all these years," Noah said softly. "Even when we had to sell almost everything else, she wouldn't let this one go. She said it reminded her that beautiful things can happen if you believe in them." Henry stared at his younger self in the painting, at the unbridled joy on his face as he worked at his easel. He remembered that feeling, the pure happiness of creating something from nothing. He remembered Charlotte's gentle encouragement, her quiet belief in his talent. And now here sat her son, across from him at this expensive restaurant table, holding the proof that someone had once seen him, truly seen him, when he was young and full of dreams. The revelation left Henry speechless, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. In this small painting, His past and present collided, forcing him to confront not only who he had been, but who he had become. Henry Winston sat in his parked car, staring up at the crumbling brick apartment building. Paint peeled from the window frames like dead skin, and trash littered the small patch of grass out front. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. "This is where they lived," he whispered to himself, his throat tight. After 20 minutes of gathering courage, he finally stepped out of his car, his expensive shoes crunching on broken glass in the parking lot. The lobby smelled of mildew and old cigarettes. Henry Winston wrinkled his nose, thinking of Noah Carter living here, then having to leave for something even worse. A heavy-set man with stained clothes slouched behind a desk, barely glancing up from his phone. "What do you want?" the landlord grunted. Henry Winston straightened his tie. "I'm inquiring about a former tenant, Charlotte Carter." "Who's asking?" The landlord's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "My name is Henry Winston. I'm investigating her situation." He pulled out his wallet and placed several $100 bills on the counter. The landlord's expression changed instantly. "Oh yeah, Carter, real shame about her. Talented lady, always painting, but couldn't make rent." He pocketed the money. 3 months behind when she passed. Had to evict the kid. Rules are rules. Henry Winston's jaw clenched. Did she ever mention? Did she know anyone from her past? Other artists, perhaps? The landlord shrugged. Kept to herself mostly. Sometimes talked about some guy she used to know. Said he had real talent or something. But that's all I know. Later that evening at La Table Royale, Henry Winston watched Noah Carter carefully cutting his steak into neat pieces. The boy had better table manners than most adults he knew. "Noah," Henry said softly, "could you tell me more about your mother's paintings?" Noah Carter looked up, his dark eyes serious. She loved painting people most. Said faces tell stories better than words. He took a small bite of meat. "But that picture I showed you," the young man, "that was her favorite. She kept it wrapped special in cloth." Henry Winston's heart pounded. Did she ever say who it was? Noah Carter nodded slowly. She said it was a boy she knew when she was young. Someone who made her believe in art. He paused, pushing peas around his plate. She said he was kind and never gave up on his drawings, even when other kids made fun of him. Henry Winston felt like he'd been struck. A memory surfaced, sitting in art class, sketching while others snickered. A girl with warm brown eyes telling him his work was beautiful, no matter what anyone said. "Charlotte," he whispered, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on his tongue. "We were in the same art program, at the community center." Noah Carter's eyes widened. "You knew my mom?" I think I did. A long time ago." Henry Winston's voice cracked slightly. "Before I decided business was more important than art." "She said the boy in the painting stopped drawing because other people were mean," Noah Carter said quietly. "It made her sad. She said talent shouldn't die because of what others think." Henry Winston stared at his hands that hadn't held a paintbrush in decades. He remembered Charlotte's encouraging smile, her fierce defense of his work when others mocked it. And now here was her son, somehow finding his way back into Henry Winston's carefully ordered life. "Your mother was very wise," Henry Winston said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Noah Carter, really looked at him, and saw Charlotte's gentle spirit shining through those young eyes. Henry Winston sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of papers and old photographs. The mahogany desk, usually pristine, was cluttered with files from Miranda Bowen, the private investigator he'd hired to trace Charlotte Carter's past. His fingers trembled slightly as he picked up her latest report. "Mr. Winston," Miranda Bowen said from her seat across the desk, her voice steady and professional. "I found something interesting in the archives of the Old Town Community Art Center." She pulled out a yellowed envelope from her briefcase. They kept records of student correspondence from their summer programs. "This letter, I think you'll want to read it." Henry Winston accepted the envelope with uncharacteristic hesitation. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble under his touch. His eyes scanned the careful handwriting, and his breath caught in his throat. "Dear Henry," the letter began, "I saw them making fun of your paintings today. Please don't listen to them. Your art speaks to people's hearts. I've never seen anyone capture emotion the way you do. Promise me you won't give up just because some kids don't understand. The world needs your gift. Your friend always, Charlotte." Henry Winston's vision blurred. He remembered that day, the sneers, the cruel laughter, the way he'd packed up his brushes and never returned to class. But he'd forgotten about Charlotte's kindness, how she'd always defended his work. "There's more," Miranda Bowen said softly, pulling out several other letters. "She wrote to you multiple times after you stopped attending classes. The center never forwarded them." Henry Winston spent hours reading through Charlotte's words. Each letter was filled with encouragement, updates about her own artistic journey, and always, the hope that he would return to painting. The final letter, dated months before he'd focused entirely on business school, showed how deeply she'd believed in him. That evening at La Table Royale, Henry Winston watched Noah Carter carefully arrange his napkin, a habit the boy had picked up from their many shared meals. The restaurant's warm lighting caught the hopeful gleam in Noah's eyes, so like his mother's. "Noah," Henry Winston said, his voice gentle, "I found something today that I'd like to show you." He pulled out Charlotte's first letter, now protected in a clear sleeve. Noah Carter accepted the letter with reverence, his small fingers tracing his mother's handwriting. As he read, his eyes grew wide with recognition. "This is Mom's writing," he whispered. "She wrote this to you?" Henry Winston nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. "Your mother believed in me when no one else did. She saw something in my art that I was too afraid to believe in myself." Noah Carter looked up, tears shining in his eyes. "She kept that painting of you all these years. She said—" His voice caught. "She said the boy in the painting had a beautiful soul, even if he forgot it himself." Henry Winston felt something break open inside his chest. Years of carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of Charlotte's long-ago kindness and her son's innocent trust. "Noah," he said, reaching across the table to take the boy's hand. "I've been thinking. These dinners, they're not enough. You deserve more than just meals and winter coats. You deserve a real home." Noah Carter's fingers tightened around Henry Winston's hand, hope and fear warring in his expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Henry Winston said, his voice firm despite his racing heart, "that I want to help you find that home, a permanent one. No more sleeping in alleys or wondering where your next meal will come from." Henry Winston stood at his office window, staring at the city lights below, but seeing only memories. In his hands, he held one of Charlotte Carter's letters, its paper worn from his constant rereading over the past few days. The weight of forgotten dreams pressed heavily on his chest. He closed his eyes, remembering the feel of a paintbrush in his hand, the smell of oils and turpentine, the way colors would blend on canvas to create something magical. Then came the crushing memory of laughter, of harsh words from his peers, of his father's disapproving stare. "Art won't pay the bills, son," his father had said. Henry Winston had believed him. That evening at La Table Royale, Henry Winston arrived earlier than usual. He found Rafael Perez organizing wine bottles in the cellar, the restaurant manager's usual cheerful demeanor, a welcome sight. "Rafael," Henry Winston said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Rafael Perez set down the bottle he was holding and turned to face him. "Of course, Mr. Winston. Is everything all right?" Henry Winston pulled out Charlotte Carter's letters from his jacket pocket. "I discovered these recently. They're from Noah's mother." His hands trembled slightly as he showed them to Rafael. "She knew me when we were young. She believed in my art when nobody else did." Rafael Perez read through the letters, his expression softening. "Mr. Winston, this is remarkable. The boy finding you after all these years. It cannot be mere coincidence." "I've been thinking about that," Henry Winston admitted. "About art, about Noah, about everything I've built my life around." He gestured vaguely at his expensive suit. "All this success, and yet—" And yet something has been missing, Raphael finished gently. Perhaps this is why Noah appeared in your life. Sometimes fate has a way of bringing us what we need most, even if we don't recognize it at first. Henry Winston nodded slowly. I can't leave him on the streets anymore, Raphael. It's not right. Then don't, Raphael said simply. You have the means to help him. What's stopping you? The question hung in the air, and Henry Winston realized he didn't have an answer. His carefully constructed walls of isolation suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of Noah's need. Later that evening, after their usual dinner, Henry Winston led Noah Carter to his car instead of saying goodbye at the restaurant door. Noah clutched his worn backpack, looking uncertain. There's somewhere I'd like to take you, Henry Winston explained, his voice gentle. Would that be all right? Noah nodded, sliding into the leather seat with careful movements. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the Grand Plaza Hotel, its elegant facade gleaming in the evening light. In the elevator, Henry Winston watched Noah's reflection in the polished doors. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in everything with quiet amazement. They stepped out onto the 12th floor, and Henry Winston used a keycard to open Suite 1204. This will be your home for now, Henry Winston said, watching as Noah Carter took in the spacious room with its plush beds and modern amenities. No more sleeping in alleys. Noah Carter stood very still in the middle of the room, his small frame rigid with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Winston, he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. Thank you so much. The simple words struck Henry Winston's heart with unexpected force. For the first time in decades, he felt truly useful, truly needed. All his wealth, his careful investments, his business empire, none of it had ever made him feel the way he did now, watching this small boy fight back tears of relief and gratitude. You're welcome, Noah, he said softly, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. You're very welcome. Miranda Bowen's heels clicked against the marble floor of Henry Winston's office as she laid out several documents on his desk. Her usually businesslike demeanor softened as she presented her findings. Mr. Winston, I found something significant in Charlotte Carter's personal effects, she said, carefully removing a worn journal from her briefcase. The social workers cataloged her belongings after her passing. This was among them. Henry Winston's hands trembled slightly as he opened the journal. Inside, Charlotte's flowing handwriting filled page after page. Miranda pointed to a particular entry dated just months before Charlotte's death. I think about Henry sometimes, Henry Winston read aloud, his voice catching. The way he used to paint with such joy, such freedom. Those vibrant colors he chose, yellows and reds that seemed to dance on the canvas. He had a child's wonder then before the world convinced him to lock it away. I hope wherever he is now, he remembers that gift. Henry Winston sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of Charlotte's words. She had carried the memory of his artistic passion all these years, even as he'd buried it beneath spreadsheets and business meetings. That evening at La Table Royale, Henry Winston noticed Noah Carter pushing food around his plate, his usual healthy appetite absent. The boy's shoulders were tense, his eyes downcast. Noah, Henry Winston said gently, is everything all right? Noah Carter set his fork down carefully as if afraid of making noise. The hotel is really nice, he said quietly. Much better than before, but... He trailed off, biting his lip. But what? Henry Winston encouraged, leaning forward. I don't want to be trouble, Noah Carter whispered, his voice barely audible. You've done so much already. The dinners, the hotel room. His small hands twisted in his lap. I know I can't stay forever. I don't want to be a burden. Henry Winston felt something crack in his chest. Here was this child, who had lost everything, worried about being an inconvenience. The same boy who had shared his bread with a stray kitten when he had nothing himself. Noah, look at me, Henry Winston said firmly but kindly. Noah's eyes lifted slowly to meet his. You are not a burden. Not now. Not ever. You deserve to feel safe and stable, to have a real home." Tears welled up in Noah Carter's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away with his sleeve. Henry Winston reached across the table and placed his hand over Noah's smaller one. In that moment, looking at this brave, vulnerable child, Henry Winston felt something shift inside him. All his careful planning, his measured decisions, his strategic thinking, none of it mattered. He knew exactly what he needed to do. "Noah," he said, his voice steady and sure, "I want to become your legal guardian. Would you like that?" Noah Carter's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring on his face. You want to take care of me? For real?" "Yes," Henry Winston replied, surprising himself with how right it felt. "For real. No more temporary solutions. No more uncertainty." Noah Carter's face broke into a smile so bright it seemed to illuminate the entire restaurant. Tears spilled freely down his cheeks now, but these were different tears, tears of joy, of relief, of belonging. For Henry Winston, the weight of years of isolation and emotional distance began to lift. In its place, he felt something new: purpose, connection, and the fierce desire to protect and nurture this child who had somehow found his way into Henry Winston's carefully ordered world. Henry Winston sat in the family services office, his usually pristine suit feeling oddly constraining as he faced Ms. Thompson, a stern-faced social worker with wire-rimmed glasses. Stacks of forms covered her desk, each one representing another step toward making Noah Carter officially his son. "Mr. Winston," Ms. Thompson said, adjusting her glasses, "while your financial stability is certainly not in question, we need to understand your motivation for this sudden decision to adopt." Henry Winston clasped his hands together, choosing his words carefully. "Noah Carter has shown me what truly matters in life. He deserves a stable home, and He paused, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "I need him as much as he needs me." Throughout the morning, Henry Winston answered countless questions about his lifestyle, work schedule, and plans for Noah Carter's education. His phone buzzed repeatedly with business calls, but for the first time in his career, Henry Winston let them go to voicemail. This mattered more. Later that afternoon in his office, Miranda Bowen found Henry Winston staring out his window, lost in thought. "The media will have a field day with this," she said gently, placing another stack of documents on his desk. "Your board members are already asking questions about the adoption rumors." Henry Winston turned to face her, his expression resolute. "Let them talk. For 30 years, I've made decisions based on what others might think. Not this time." Miranda Bowen smiled, noting the change in her usually guarded client. "You know what? This is the first time I've seen you absolutely certain about something personal." "It is," Henry Winston admitted, his voice soft but firm. "When I look at Noah, I don't see a business decision or a charity case. I see my son." That evening, Henry Winston led Noah Carter up 3 flights of stairs to a modest apartment building. It wasn't in the prestigious neighborhood where Henry Winston lived, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it felt like a real home. Is this where we're going to live?" Noah Carter asked, his eyes wide as Henry Winston unlocked the door. "For now," Henry Winston replied, watching as Noah Carter stepped inside. "I thought you might prefer something cozier than the hotel while we wait for the adoption to be finalized." The apartment was simple but thoughtfully furnished. A small bedroom had been painted in cheerful blues and greens, with a desk for homework and shelves for books. The living room featured a comfortable couch and, to Noah Carter's delight, an easel by the window. "You can paint here," Henry Winston explained, touching the easel gently. "Like your mother did." Noah Carter ran his hand along the smooth wooden surface, his eyes glistening. "Really? You mean it?" "Of course," Henry Winston said, his throat tight with emotion. "This is your home now, Noah. You can make it your own." As Noah Carter explored the apartment, touching everything with careful wonder, Henry Winston watched from the kitchen doorway. His phone vibrated again, another message about tomorrow's board meeting, and the growing whispers about his adoption plans. But looking at Noah Carter's joy as he discovered each new corner of his home, Henry Winston knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. The boy stopped at a small photo frame on the wall. It was empty, waiting to be filled. "What's this for?" Noah Carter asked. "That's for our first family photo," Henry Winston replied, surprising himself with how naturally the word family came to his lips. "Once everything is official." Noah Carter's smile lit up the room, and Henry Winston felt that unfamiliar but welcome warmth in his chest again. Whatever challenges lay ahead with the adoption process, whatever his business associates might say, this moment confirmed everything. This was what giving life meaning felt like. Henry Winston spent the next few days transforming the apartment into a proper home for a child. His usual efficiency took on a gentler quality as he carefully selected items for Noah Carter. In the bedroom, he replaced the plain bedding with soft blankets decorated with stars and spaceships, remembering how Noah Carter had once mentioned his fascination with astronomy. Bookshelves that had stood empty now held carefully chosen volumes, adventure stories, art books, and educational texts that would nurture both Noah Carter's creativity and his learning. Henry Winston found himself pausing occasionally to flip through the pages, imagining reading them together during quiet evenings. In the kitchen, Henry Winston stocked the cabinets with healthy snacks and placed step stools near the counters so Noah Carter could reach everything safely. He even bought child-friendly plates and cups, each decision making the space feel more like a real home. The family services representative arrived promptly at 9 in the morning. Ms. Thompson's inspection was thorough, her pencil scratching against her clipboard as she moved from room to room. Henry Winston followed behind, his usual confidence replaced by an unfamiliar nervousness. "You've thought this through, Mr. Winston," Ms. Thompson noted, examining the newly installed nightlight in Noah Carter's room. "These are thoughtful touches." "Noah deserves nothing less," Henry Winston replied simply, his hand resting on the doorframe of what would soon be his son's bedroom. The morning of the hearing arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Henry Winston helped Noah Carter with his tie, both of them standing before the bathroom mirror. The second-hand suit fit Noah Carter well enough, though the sleeves needed to be rolled up slightly. "Are you nervous?" Noah Carter asked, his small fingers fidgeting with his collar. Henry Winston paused, meeting Noah Carter's eyes in the mirror. "Yes," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty, "but sometimes the most important things make us nervous." They arrived at the courthouse early, their footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. Noah Carter stayed close to Henry Winston's side, his presence both seeking and offering comfort. Other families passed by, some celebrating, others waiting anxiously like them. The courtroom felt vast and formal, but the judge's manner was surprisingly warm. She reviewed their case carefully, asking questions that showed genuine interest in their welfare. Henry Winston answered each query with careful consideration, his usual businesslike demeanor softened by genuine emotion. "Mr. Winston," the judge said, "you've demonstrated exceptional commitment to Noah's well-being. And Noah, you've shown remarkable resilience through these changes." Noah Carter sat up straighter in his chair, his small hand finding Henry Winston's sleeve. "It is the decision of this court," the judge continued, "to grant full guardianship of Noah Carter to Henry Winston, effective immediately." The words hung in the air for a moment before settling into reality. Henry Winston felt Noah Carter's grip tighten on his sleeve, and when he looked down, he saw tears in the boy's eyes that matched the moisture in his own. They stood together, father and son now in the eyes of the law. Henry Winston placed his hand gently on Noah Carter's shoulder, feeling the trembling happiness beneath the borrowed suit jacket. No business deal, no amount of wealth had ever filled him with such profound satisfaction as this quiet moment of connection. As they left the courtroom, Noah Carter looked up at Henry Winston with a mix of wonder and certainty. "We're really family now?" he asked softly. "Yes," Henry Winston answered, his voice thick with emotion. "We really are." The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Henry Winston and Noah Carter walked home from school together, their footsteps in sync along the leaf-scattered sidewalk. This had become their afternoon ritual, Henry Winston adjusting his usual business schedule to be there at 3 o'clock sharp, waiting outside the school gates with other parents. And then Tommy showed me his science project about volcanoes, Noah Carter chatted excitedly, his backpack bouncing slightly as he walked. He said I could help him with the painting part. Henry Winston's smile tightened slightly at the mention of painting, but he kept his voice warm. That's wonderful, son. I'm glad you're making such good friends. Their apartment welcomed them with familiar comfort. Henry Winston had grown accustomed to the cheerful drawings now decorating the refrigerator and the scattered toys that sometimes found their way under the coffee table. The space had transformed from its former stark efficiency into something lived in and warm. Homework first, Henry Winston reminded gently, as Noah Carter reached for the television remote. The boy nodded, already pulling out his math workbook. They settled into their usual spots at the kitchen table, Noah Carter with his schoolwork, Henry Winston with his laptop, though he found himself spending more time helping with multiplication tables than reviewing business reports. Later that evening, they shared a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Noah Carter's favorite. Henry Winston had surprised himself by learning to cook basic meals, finding unexpected satisfaction in providing these small comforts for his son. Dad, Noah Carter said between bites, Ms. Rodriguez says we're having an art show next month. All the parents are coming. Henry Winston carefully twirled pasta around his fork, avoiding his son's eager eyes. That sounds nice, he said neutrally. Maybe you could help me with my project? Tommy says his dad's helping him. I'm sure you'll do fine on your own, Henry Winston replied, his voice carrying a finality that made Noah Carter's shoulders droop slightly. After dinner, while Henry Winston was on a business call in his study, Noah Carter wandered through their home, looking for extra paper for his art project. He opened the hall closet, pushing past winter coats and stored blankets. In the far corner, partially hidden behind a stack of old files, sat a dusty cardboard box. Noah Carter pulled it forward carefully, curious about the faded label reading art supplies. Inside, he found brushes with dried paint still clinging to their bristles, half-used tubes of oil colors, and several small canvases turned face down. As he lifted one canvas, footsteps approached from behind. "What are you doing?" Henry Winston's voice was sharp, unusual in its intensity. Noah Carter turned, still holding the canvas. "I was just looking for paper," he explained, his voice small. "I found these old paint things." Henry Winston stepped forward quickly, taking the canvas and returning it to the box. "I don't paint anymore," he said firmly, closing the box with decisive movements. "That was a long time ago." "But Mom's painting showed." "Noah." Henry Winston's tone left no room for discussion. "I said I don't paint anymore. Please don't go through things without asking." He picked up the box, his knuckles white against the cardboard. "Now what kind of paper did you need? I'll get you some from my office." Noah Carter watched his father's rigid back as he carried the box away, disappearing into his study. The sound of a drawer closing echoed through the apartment, followed by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to fill every corner. Later that night, as Henry Winston tucked Noah Carter into bed, the tension still lingered between them. Noah Carter hugged his stuffed bear close, wanting to ask more questions, but sensing it wasn't the right time. Henry Winston's goodnight kiss was as gentle as always, but his eyes avoided the colorful drawings Noah Carter had taped to the walls, as if even looking at them might stir something he'd rather keep buried. Noah Carter sat in his usual booth at La Table Royale, pushing his chocolate mousse around with a spoon. Rafael Perez, who had grown fond of the boy over the past months, noticed his troubled expression. "Something bothering you, little man?" Rafael asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Henry Winston was running late for their regular dinner, caught up in a business meeting. Noah Carter looked up, his eyes full of worry. "Mr. Perez, can I tell you something?" When Rafael nodded encouragingly, the boy continued. "It's about my dad. Every time I try to talk about painting or show him my drawings, he gets different, like he's scared of art or something." Rafael Perez's kind face softened with understanding, Adults can be complicated, Noah. Sometimes things that seem simple to us can be very difficult for them. But why? Noah Carter's voice cracked slightly. Mom's painting showed he used to love art. I just want him to paint with me. Raphael leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Listen, Noah, sometimes the best way to help someone isn't by pushing them. It's by being patient and showing them little by little that it's safe to open up. Noah Carter absorbed these words, nodding slowly. Like when I first met him, and he had to get used to talking to me. Exactly like that, Raphael smiled. Give him time. Later that evening, Henry Winston and Noah Carter were having dinner at their apartment when Victoria Myers arrived unannounced. Her sharp heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she entered, her business suit as pristine as ever. Henry, we need to talk, she said, her tone professional but concerned. The Morgan merger isn't going to close itself. Henry Winston glanced at Noah Carter, who was finishing his homework at the dining table. Victoria, we agreed this could wait until tomorrow. That's exactly my point, Victoria said, lowering her voice. Everything seems to be waiting lately. The board is getting anxious about your involvement. Henry Winston straightened his shoulders. I haven't missed any crucial meetings or deadlines. But you're not as present as you used to be, Victoria pressed. The Henry Winston I know would have closed this deal weeks ago. The Henry Winston you know is now a father, he replied firmly. I won't apologize for that. I can handle both responsibilities. Victoria's expression softened slightly as she glanced around the apartment. Her eyes landed on Noah Carter's drawings spread across the table, detailed sketches of the city skyline and portraits of people from the restaurant. These are quite impressive, she remarked, picking up one of the drawings. Noah, did you do these? Noah Carter nodded shyly. Yes, ma'am. You have real talent, Victoria said. Henry, have you seen these? They remind me of those sketches you used to do in college. The room grew eerily quiet. Henry Winston's face had become a mask, his jaw tightening visibly. Without a word, he turned and walked to his study, closing the door behind him with a soft but definitive click. Inside the study, Henry Winston sank into his leather chair, memories washing over him unbidden. The art show where his classmates had laughed at his work, the harsh words from his father about childish dreams, the day he'd packed away his brushes, vowing to pursue something practical instead. He could hear Victoria and Noah Carter's muffled voices in the other room, but he remained in his chair, hands gripping the armrests as he battled the familiar shame that always accompanied thoughts of his abandoned art. The painting of his younger self, the one Charlotte Carter had kept all those years, seemed to mock him from his memory, a reminder of dreams he'd been too afraid to chase. Spring had brought new life to the city, and with it came the annual student art exhibition at Noah Carter's school. The event transformed the gymnasium into a makeshift gallery, with paintings and drawings hung carefully on portable walls and display boards. Henry Winston adjusted his tie nervously as he followed Noah Carter through the school's entrance. He hadn't stepped foot in an art gallery, even a children's one, for decades. The familiar scent of paint and paper made his stomach tighten. Dad, come on. Noah Carter tugged at his sleeve, eyes bright with excitement. Mrs. Thompson says our class pieces are in the main section. Henry Winston forced a smile, though his shoulders remained tense. Around them, proud parents admired their children's artwork while students darted between displays, pointing and chattering. The walls burst with color, landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces created by young hands learning to express themselves. Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, approached them. Mr. Winston, I'm so glad you could make it. Noah has such a natural gift for composition. Henry Winston nodded stiffly, his practiced business smile failing to reach his eyes. Thank you for inviting us. Would you like to see the fourth grade gallery? Mrs. Thompson gestured toward a section near the window. The children explored different styles this semester. Noah Carter practically bounced as they walked, pointing out his friend's artwork. Look, Dad, Jenny made that sunset, and Marcus did that cool tiger. But Henry Winston barely heard him. His attention had fixed on a student's abstract piece that reminded him painfully of his own work from decades ago. Before the mockery, before he'd locked away his passion in pursuit of success, his hands grew clammy as he remembered the sneers, the whispers, the crushing weight of disappointment. "Mr. Winston?" Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you all right?" I need some air," Henry Winston muttered. "Noah, we should go." "But Dad, we just got here." Noah Carter's face fell. "I haven't shown you my painting yet." Henry Winston was already heading for the exit, his breathing shallow. "Another time, Noah. I have an important call to make." The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken words. Noah Carter clutched his backpack, occasionally glancing at his father's rigid profile. Once they reached their apartment, Henry Winston retreated to his study, claiming work demanded his attention. Later that evening, Noah Carter approached his father's desk with a piece of paper in his hands. He'd spent the last hour working on it, trying to capture their life together. Two figures, one tall and one small, standing in front of their apartment building. Though simple, the drawing held the pure love of a child for his father. "Dad?" Noah Carter's voice was soft. "I made this for you." Henry Winston looked up from his laptop, his expression softening slightly at his son's offering. "Thank you, Noah." He accepted the drawing, managing a tight smile that didn't quite hide his discomfort. After Noah Carter went to bed, Henry Winston sat alone in his study, staring at his son's drawing. With trembling hands, he opened his bottom desk drawer and pulled out an old sketch pad. Inside was a charcoal drawing he'd done in his youth, a self-portrait full of hope and determination. In one swift motion, he tore the page from the pad and crumpled it, throwing it into the wastebasket. The sound of paper crushing seemed to echo his own crushed dreams. He looked at Noah Carter's drawing again, pride and love warring with decades of buried shame and fear. The moon cast long shadows through the study window as Henry Winston sat there, caught between the father he wanted to be and the artist he'd never allowed himself to become. One rainy Saturday afternoon, while Henry Winston was caught up in a lengthy business call, Noah Carter's curiosity got the better of him. He'd noticed how his father's eyes would cloud over whenever art came up in conversation, how his shoulders would tense at the mere mention of painting. There had to be a reason. Noah Carter crept into his father's study, his heart pounding. The bottom drawer of the massive oak desk was always locked, but today it was slightly ajar, probably from Henry Winston's hasty exit when his phone rang. With trembling fingers, Noah Carter pulled it open. There, beneath stacks of old papers, lay a leather-bound sketchbook. The pages were yellowed with age, the corners soft and worn. Noah Carter lifted it carefully, as if handling a precious artifact. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. The first page showed a street scene rendered in charcoal, people hurrying past shop windows, their expressions so vivid they seemed alive. Each subsequent page revealed more treasures, portraits capturing raw emotion, landscapes that seemed to pulse with energy, abstract pieces that made Noah Carter's heart race with their bold strokes and daring compositions. "This is amazing," Noah Carter whispered, tracing a finger along the edge of a particularly striking drawing. He'd never imagined his stern, business-minded father could create something so beautiful, so full of life. "What are you doing?" Noah Carter jumped at Henry Winston's sharp voice. His father stood in the doorway, face dark with anger. I just wanted to see," Noah Carter stammered, still holding the sketchbook. "Put that down." Henry Winston strode forward, snatching the book from his son's hands. "These are private. You had no right to go through my things." "But Dad, they're so good. Why did you stop?" "Enough." Henry Winston's voice cracked like thunder. "Go to your room. Now." Noah Carter fled, tears burning in his eyes. He slammed his bedroom door and threw himself onto his bed, confused and hurt by his father's reaction. Hours passed, and dinner time approached, but Noah Carter stayed put, his stomach too knotted with emotion to feel hungry. A gentle knock came at his door. "Noah?" Henry Winston's voice was softer now. "Can we talk?" Noah Carter didn't answer, but Henry Winston entered anyway, carrying a tray with 2 plates of pasta. He set it down on Noah Carter's desk and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry I yelled," Henry Winston said quietly. I overreacted." Noah Carter sat up, wiping his eyes. "Why don't you want anyone to see your art? It's wonderful." Henry Winston's shoulders slumped. "When I was young, not much older than you, I loved to draw. It was everything to me. But when I showed my work at a school exhibition, some older students, they laughed. Called my art childish, said I was wasting my time." He swallowed hard. "Their parents were successful business people. They said no one would ever take me seriously if I pursued art." "But that's not true," Noah Carter protested. "I know that now," Henry Winston admitted. "But back then, it hurt so much that I locked that part of myself away. I focused on business, on making money, on proving them wrong about my worth." Noah Carter moved closer to his father, placing a small hand on his arm. "You're not that boy anymore, Dad. It's okay to dream again." Henry Winston's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The words seemed to pierce straight through the walls he'd built around his heart. Pain flickered across his face, but there was something else too. A tiny spark of hope, like a distant star breaking through storm clouds. The seasons turned, and with them came change. Henry Winston's successful investments had yielded even greater returns, allowing him to purchase a sprawling penthouse apartment in a quieter, more residential area of the city. The space was modern yet warm, with large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. One particular area, a corner blessed with perfect northern exposure, remained conspicuously empty, its potential as an art studio obvious to both father and son, though neither mentioned it. Noah Carter, now 10, had grown into a thoughtful, creative child. His new school offered comprehensive art classes, and he threw himself into them with enthusiasm. His teacher, Ms. Martinez, often praised his natural talent for capturing emotion in his drawings. When the school announced a district-wide art competition, Noah Carter submitted a piece that combined elements of abstract and realistic styles, a cityscape viewed through rain-streaked glass that seemed to dance with color and movement. The news of his win came on a Tuesday afternoon. Noah Carter burst into the apartment, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, waving the announcement paper like a victory flag. Dad, I won first place," he called out, finding Henry Winston in his home office. "They're going to display my painting at the Youth Art Gallery next month." Henry Winston's smile was genuine, though something flickered behind his eyes. "That's wonderful, son. Congratulations." Noah Carter caught his breath, then added more softly, Would you come to the opening? It's on a Saturday evening, so you won't have to miss work." Henry Winston's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on his desk. The silence stretched for a moment before he nodded. "Of course I'll be there." The evening of the exhibition arrived clear and cool. The Youth Art Gallery, though modest, had been transformed into a celebration of young talent. Noah Carter's painting hung in a prime spot, the lighting perfect, the frame simple but elegant. Henry Winston stood beside his son, pride warring with an old familiar discomfort. "Henry? Henry Winston, is that really you?" The voice came from behind them, feminine and surprised. Henry Winston turned, his face draining of color as he recognized the speaker, Evelyn Brooks, her silver hair styled elegantly, her artist's smock splattered with fresh paint. "Evelyn," he managed, his voice tight, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I help organize these youth exhibitions," she explained, her eyes bright with recognition. "My goodness, it must be 30 years. Whatever happened to you? Your work was so promising. Those landscapes you used to do, the way you captured light." Henry Winston's posture stiffened. Noah Carter watched the interaction intently, noting how his father's hands had begun to tremble slightly. "I went into business," Henry Winston cut in, his tone clipped. "It was the practical choice." "Practical?" Evelyn's brow furrowed. "But your talent?" "If you'll excuse us," Henry Winston interrupted, placing a hand on Noah Carter's shoulder. "We should continue viewing the other exhibits." Without waiting for a response, he steered Noah Carter away, his steps quick and purposeful. Noah Carter glanced back to see Evelyn Brooks watching them go, confusion and something like sadness on her face. As they moved through the gallery, Noah Carter observed his father's rigid posture, the way his eyes skated past the artwork without really seeing it. In that moment, Noah Carter made a silent promise to himself. Whatever had happened in his father's past, whatever had made him lock away his passion so completely, Noah Carter would find a way to help him heal. The empty corner in their new home wouldn't stay empty forever. Not if Noah Carter had anything to say about it. That evening, after returning from the youth exhibition, Henry Winston sat heavily in his favorite armchair. The encounter with Evelyn Brooks had clearly unsettled him. Noah Carter watched his father's face, noting the deep lines of worry that hadn't been there earlier in the day. "Dad?" Noah Carter ventured carefully, settling on the plush carpet near Henry Winston's feet. "Can you tell me about her? About Evelyn Brooks?" Henry Winston's eyes remained fixed on some distant point, but his expression softened slightly. "Evelyn was remarkable," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She could paint anything she imagined, bring any scene to life, but more than that, she had courage, real courage." Noah Carter leaned forward, absorbing every word. This was the first time his father had willingly spoken about his artistic past. "When we were young," Henry Winston continued, "people would criticize our work. It's what happens when you're an artist. Not everyone understands or appreciates what you create. But while their words crushed me, made me doubt everything about myself, Evelyn." He paused, swallowing hard. Evelyn just kept painting. She'd smile and say, "Their opinion is their business. My art is mine." "Is that why you stopped?" Noah Carter asked gently. "Because of what people said?" Henry Winston nodded slowly. "I envied her strength. Every time someone mocked my work, I felt smaller, more uncertain. Eventually, I convinced myself that business was safer. Numbers don't judge you. Profit margins don't laugh." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of regret. Noah Carter reached out and squeezed his father's hand, an instinctive gesture of comfort that made Henry Winston's eyes shine with unexpected tears. Later that night, after his father had retreated to his study, Noah Carter made a phone call. Miranda Bowen answered on the third ring, her voice professional but warm. "Ms. Bowen, it's Noah Carter. I need your help again," he explained, keeping his voice low. "Could you find out more about my dad's old art circle? The people he used to paint with?" Miranda Bowen's interest was immediate. "Like Evelyn Brooks?" "Yes, exactly. And maybe there are others who remember him from back then. People who saw something special in his art, like my mom did." "I'll start digging," Miranda Bowen promised. "Sometimes the past holds keys to the future." The next afternoon, while Henry Winston was at work, Noah Carter decided to explore some boxes that had been moved to their new home but never unpacked. In the back of a closet, behind winter coats and old financial records, he found a carefully wrapped canvas. His hands trembled as he gently removed the brown paper. The painting that emerged was unlike any of his mother's other works. It was abstract, with sweeping strokes of blue and gold that seemed to dance across the canvas. But there in the center, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was the outline of a young man. He stood at an easel, his posture confident, his brush poised to create. Noah Carter's breath caught in his throat. The figure was unmistakably a younger version of his father, captured in the midst of painting. The work was unfinished, some areas merely sketched in pencil, as if Charlotte Carter had been planning to complete it but never got the chance. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Noah Carter studied every detail of the painting. His mother had seen something in Henry Winston all those years ago, something true and valuable that had gotten buried under years of fear and doubt. Looking at the unfinished canvas, Noah Carter felt a fierce determination take root in his heart. His mother had believed in Henry Winston's talent, and now it was up to him to help his father believe in it too. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees outside their new home, as Noah Carter sat at the kitchen table, carefully shading a landscape drawing. Henry Winston watched from the doorway, a mix of pride and unease crossing his face. "Dad," Noah Carter said without looking up. Why don't you ever paint anymore? Really? Henry Winston's shoulders stiffened. Noah, we've discussed this. I have responsibilities now. The business, our home, your future. But you could do both, Noah Carter persisted, finally meeting his father's eyes. Lots of people have jobs and hobbies. Before Henry Winston could form another excuse, the doorbell rang. Miranda Bowen stood on their doorstep, clutching a leather portfolio with barely contained excitement. I found something, she announced, stepping inside. Something important. She laid the portfolio on the kitchen table, carefully removing a glossy catalog. Its pages were yellowed with age, but the images remained clear. This is from the Sterling Gallery's New Artist Showcase, 1985. Henry Winston's breath caught as Miranda Bowen opened to a specific page. There, side by side, hung two paintings, one by Charlotte Carter and one by a young Henry Winston. His piece showed a city street at dawn, painted with bold strokes and vibrant colors that seemed to pulse with life. Noah Carter leaned in close. Dad, that's amazing. You painted that? Henry Winston's fingers hovered over the image, trembling slightly. I'd forgotten about this show. Charlotte and I... He swallowed hard. We were both selected. She was so excited. Later that evening, after Miranda Bowen had left, father and son sat together on the couch, still studying the catalog. Noah Carter noticed how his father's eyes kept returning to his own painting, as if drawn by an invisible force. Tell me about that morning, Noah Carter said softly. The one in your painting. Henry Winston was quiet for a long moment. I woke up before sunrise, he finally said, his voice distant with memory. The streets were empty except for a few delivery trucks. The light was... It was perfect. Golden and new. I sketched for hours, then painted for days after. Noah Carter watched his father's face soften, years of guardedness melting away as he remembered. You loved it, didn't you? The painting? I did, Henry Winston admitted, so quietly Noah Carter almost missed it. He ran his fingers over the catalog page one more time before closing it gently. Though Henry Winston said nothing more that evening, Noah Carter noticed him glancing thoughtfully at the empty space in their living room, the space that could be a studio. For the first time since Noah Carter had known him, his father's resistance to art seemed to waver, just slightly, like a crack forming in a long frozen lake. Henry Winston sat in his corner office staring at spreadsheets while Victoria Myers paced before his desk. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely noticed it. Henry, this merger is worth millions, Victoria Myers said, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The board meeting is in 3 days, and you seem distracted. He nodded absently, his thoughts drifting to the gallery catalog he'd seen the night before. The memory of those bold brushstrokes, that perfect dawn light. Henry, Victoria Myers snapped her fingers. Are you even listening? Sterling Industries won't wait forever. We need your full attention on this. Of course, he said, straightening in his chair. The merger, yes. Victoria Myers stopped pacing and leaned over his desk. What's going on with you lately? Ever since you adopted that boy? Noah, Henry Winston corrected firmly. His name is Noah. Fine, Noah, but you've changed, Henry. The man I knew would never let personal matters interfere with business. Before Henry Winston could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Noah Carter. Dad, found something important. Need to show you tonight. That evening, Henry Winston arrived home to find Noah Carter waiting at the kitchen table, holding an aged envelope. Miranda Bowen brought this over, Noah Carter explained, his voice quiet but excited. It was in some of Mom's old things. She never sent it. Henry Winston sat down beside his son, carefully opening the envelope. The paper was thin, the handwriting delicate but determined. Dear Henry, your art has always had the power to move people, to make them see the world differently. I've watched you paint since we were teenagers, and I've never seen anyone capture light and hope the way you do. Don't let fear or others' expectations dim that gift. Your paintings could transform lives, Henry. They already transformed mine. With faith in your talent, Charlotte. Henry Winston's hands trembled as he read the words again. Noah Carter watched him closely, understanding the weight of this moment. Later that night, Henry Winston stood in his study, Charlotte Carter's letter in one hand while he stared at the blank canvas Miranda Bowen had given him as a gentle nudge forward. It stood pristine on an easel, both inviting and intimidating. His phone buzzed again. Victoria Myers sending another urgent message about the merger documents. Henry Winston looked between the phone and the canvas, feeling pulled in two directions. The safe, profitable path of business stretched before him, familiar and secure. But that blank canvas whispered of possibilities, of dreams long buried but never truly forgotten. He stood there, frozen between these two worlds, Charlotte Carter's words echoing in his mind about transforming lives through art. The brush set Miranda Bowen had included with the canvas lay unopened on his desk, waiting for his decision. Henry Winston stood outside Evelyn Brooks's art studio, a converted warehouse in the city's arts district. Paint-splattered windows filtered the afternoon light, casting colorful shadows on the sidewalk. His hand hesitated on the door handle before he finally pushed it open. The scent of oil paints and turpentine hit him immediately. Canvases lined the walls, each bursting with bold colors and sweeping brushstrokes. Evelyn Brooks stood at an easel, her silver hair tied back with a paint-stained bandana. "Henry Winston," she said warmly, putting down her palette. "I wondered if you might find your way here." He shifted uncomfortably, taking in the familiar smell that brought back so many memories. I needed to talk to someone who knew Charlotte Carter." Evelyn Brooks gestured to a worn couch near her workspace. As they sat, she studied his face with kind eyes. "Why did you stop painting, Henry? You had such promise." "The business world seemed more certain," he said, his voice tight. "Art felt too risky." "Ah." Evelyn Brooks nodded, reaching for an old photo album. Charlotte Carter used to say something about that. She believed art wasn't about certainty, it was about courage. She opened the album, revealing photographs of a younger Charlotte Carter teaching at a community center. "She helped so many of us find our voice. When I wanted to quit, she convinced me to keep going. Paint through the fear," she'd say. "That's where the magic happens." Henry Winston's throat tightened as he looked at Charlotte Carter's smiling face in the photos. "I didn't know she helped other artists." "Oh yes," Evelyn Brooks said softly. "She believed in the healing power of art, especially for those who'd lost faith in themselves." She gave Henry Winston a meaningful look. "Like you did." Henry Winston stared at his hands, guilt washing over him. "I let her down." "No." Evelyn Brooks stood and walked to a drawer. "You let yourself down." She returned with a well-worn paintbrush, its handle smooth from years of use. "Charlotte Carter kept this for you. She asked me to hold on to it, hoping you'd come back to art someday." Henry Winston took the brush with trembling fingers. Its weight felt both foreign and familiar. "You owe it to yourself to try again, Henry," Evelyn Brooks said gently. "And yes, to Charlotte too, but mostly to yourself." He gripped the brush tightly, feeling the years of buried dreams rising to the surface. As he left the studio, he carried the brush like a talisman, a bridge between his past and an uncertain but possibly brighter future. Henry Winston placed the paintbrush from Evelyn Brooks on his mahogany desk, right next to his laptop displaying urgent emails from Victoria Myers about the merger. His fingers lingered on the worn wooden handle before he pulled away to answer another business call. For the next week, he moved through his days like a man divided. In meetings, Victoria Myers's voice droned on about profit projections and shareholder expectations, but his mind kept drifting to the paintbrush waiting at home. Each night, he'd stand in his study staring at it until Noah Carter called him for dinner. "Dad," Noah Carter said one morning, catching Henry Winston reviewing merger documents at the breakfast table. "Let's take a day off, just you and me." Henry Winston started to protest, but something in his son's hopeful expression made him pause. "Where did you have in mind?" They ended up at the pier, a place Henry Winston hadn't visited in years. Street artists lined the boardwalk, their easels catching the morning light. A woman with rainbow-streaked hair created chalk masterpieces on the concrete, while a young man transformed simple caricatures into stories that made children laugh. Henry Winston watched them, transfixed. These artists worked without pretense or fear, creating purely for the joy of it. He remembered that feeling, the freedom of putting brush to canvas without worrying about critics or success. "Look at them, Dad," Noah Carter said softly. "They're so happy just making art." As they walked, Henry Winston found himself studying the techniques of each artist they passed. One man's bold brushstrokes reminded him of his own early style, back when he painted without restraint. Near sunset, they sat on a bench sharing hot chocolate. Noah Carter seemed to choose his words carefully as he spoke. "I found something interesting yesterday. One of Mom's unfinished paintings." Henry Winston's hands tightened around his cup. "It's beautiful," Noah Carter continued. "There's this figure in it. Looks just like you when you were younger." He glanced at his father. Maybe you could finish it?" Henry Winston stared out at the water, his throat tight. The idea of completing Charlotte Carter's work stirred something deep within him. Terror, yes, but also a whisper of possibility. He didn't respond, but he tucked the suggestion away like a precious stone, feeling its weight in his heart. The morning sun filtered through the study's heavy curtains as Henry Winston stood before Charlotte Carter's unfinished painting. His hands shook slightly as he lifted it from its protective wrapping. The canvas seemed to pulse with untold possibilities, abstract shapes dancing around the younger version of himself that Charlotte Carter had captured with such tender precision. He ran his fingers along the dried paint strokes, feeling every ridge and valley she had created. The shapes surrounding his portrait were fluid, like music frozen in time, blues and greens swirling into soft yellows. But there was so much white space left, so much potential waiting to be fulfilled. His phone buzzed. Victoria Myers' name flashed on the screen, reminding him of their scheduled lunch meeting to discuss the merger's final details. Henry Winston stared at it for a long moment before pressing decline. He typed a brief message. Something urgent came up. Need to reschedule. Turning the phone off completely, he began to pace the study. Each step brought back memories of late nights spent sketching under dim lights, of the pure joy he'd felt watching images emerge from blank pages. He remembered the weight of charcoal in his fingers, the smell of turpentine, the satisfaction of capturing exactly what his mind's eye saw. In the corner stood an old easel, untouched for decades. Henry Winston approached it like one might approach a long-lost friend, cautiously, reverently. His fingers trembled as he unfolded its wooden legs and adjusted its height. The familiar motions awakened muscle memories he thought he'd lost forever. With careful movements, he placed Charlotte Carter's canvas on the easel. The morning light caught the unfinished portions, making them glow like fresh snow. He opened a drawer and pulled out the paintbrush Evelyn Brooks had given him, its wooden handle smooth and inviting. Outside the study door, Noah Carter pressed his ear against the wood. He heard his father's footsteps, the creak of the easel, the soft clink of brush against water glass. His heart raced with anticipation and hope. Henry Winston squeezed a few colors onto a palette, colors that matched Charlotte Carter's original choices. His hand hovered over the canvas as doubts crashed through him like waves. What right did he have to complete her work? What if he ruined it? What if he'd lost whatever talent he once possessed? But then he remembered Noah Carter's words at the pier, remembered Charlotte Carter's unwavering belief in him, remembered Evelyn Brooks's gentle encouragement. He thought of all the years spent running from this moment, all the time wasted trying to be someone else. Noah Carter held his breath as he heard the first whisper of brush against canvas. The sound was so faint he might have imagined it, but then it came again, stronger, more confident. A smile spread across his face as tears welled in his eyes. Through the crack beneath the door, he could see his father's shadow moving with purpose. Inside the study, Henry Winston made his first decisive stroke, completing one of Charlotte Carter's unfinished curves. The blue paint flowed from his brush like water breaking through a dam. In that moment, something inside him shifted. a wall crumbling, a wound beginning to heal. His hand moved again, adding another stroke that harmonized perfectly with Charlotte Carter's original vision. For 5 days straight, Henry Winston rose before dawn, sneaking into his study like a child stealing cookies. The familiar scent of oil paints and mineral spirits became his morning coffee, waking his senses and stirring something deep within his soul. Each brushstroke on Charlotte Carter's unfinished canvas felt like both a conversation with her and a rediscovery of himself. The painting evolved slowly. Henry Winston would stand back, studying the abstract swirls she had created, then carefully add his own touches. Sometimes his hand trembled so badly he had to step away, take deep breaths, and remind himself that it was okay to try again. Other times the brush seemed to dance on its own, guided by some invisible force that knew exactly where each color should flow. "The blues need to be deeper here," he muttered to himself one morning, mixing paint with practiced precision. "But her yellows, they're so delicate." He found himself talking to Charlotte Carter's ghost, asking her opinion, imagining her gentle encouragement. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from Victoria Myers. Each one grew more urgent than the last. "The merger papers need your signature." "The board is getting anxious." "Henry, this deal won't wait forever." He responded with brief, non-committal texts, something he'd never done before. The old Henry Winston would have dropped everything for business. But now, watching dawn break through his study window, he felt a strange sense of peace in letting those demands wait. On the 6th day, Victoria Myers appeared unannounced at his office. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she strode in, folders clutched tightly in her hands. "Henry, this isn't like you," she said, her voice tight with concern and frustration. "We've worked too hard to let this merger slip away. What's going on?" Henry Winston looked up from his desk, where he'd been secretly sketching in the margins of his merger documents. A calm smile played at the corners of his mouth, an expression Victoria Myers had never seen before. "The merger will happen, Victoria," he said quietly. "But I've discovered something important about balance, about making room for more than just business in my life." Victoria Myers opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. The serene certainty in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the rigid, predictable Henry Winston she'd known for years. This was someone different, someone more whole. Late that evening, Noah Carter crept down the hallway toward his father's study. The door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the darkness. He peered in, holding his breath. Henry Winston stood before the easel, paintbrush suspended in midair. The painting had transformed. Charlotte Carter's original abstract form still danced across the canvas, but now they were joined by bold strokes of deep blue and rich purple. Henry Winston's additions didn't fight with her style. They enhanced it, creating a harmony neither artist could have achieved alone. The portrait at the center, the younger Henry Winston that Charlotte Carter had begun, now seemed to glow with new life. The background swirled with energy, as if the figure might step right out of the frame and start painting himself. Noah Carter must have made a small sound because Henry Winston turned. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. They both stared at the painting, understanding passing between them without words. This wasn't just art anymore. It was a bridge between past and present, between mother and son, between the man Henry Winston had been and the one he was becoming. "She would have loved this," Noah Carter whispered, stepping into the room. Henry Winston nodded, his eyes glistening in the lamplight. He reached out and squeezed his son's shoulder, leaving a small smudge of blue paint on Noah Carter's pajama top. Neither of them minded. For 3 days straight, Henry Winston moved between two worlds. In his study, surrounded by the comforting scent of oil paints, he put the finishing touches on Charlotte Carter's painting. In his office, surrounded by stacks of merger documents, he fielded endless calls and emails. The contrast between these spaces couldn't have been starker, yet for the first time in his life, he felt oddly at peace with the duality. Victoria Myers arrived at his office unannounced on Thursday morning, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor with determined precision. She found Henry Winston studying a spreadsheet while absent-mindedly cleaning a paintbrush, a sight that made her pause in the doorway. "Henry," she said, her voice tight with barely contained frustration, The board is getting restless. This merger represents millions in potential revenue. We can't afford any distractions right now." Henry Winston looked up, noting the worry lines creasing her forehead. In the past, such concern would have immediately snapped him back to attention, made him abandon everything else. But now, he simply offered a calm smile. "The deal will happen, Victoria," he said, setting the brush down carefully. "I've reviewed all the paperwork. The numbers make sense, but I won't sacrifice everything else in my life for it." Victoria Myers sank into the chair across from his desk, clearly thrown by his composure. "This isn't like you," she said. "You've always put business first. Always. And now, with the biggest deal of our careers on the line, you're painting?" "I'm doing both," Henry Winston replied. He gestured to the neat stack of signed documents on his desk. "The merger documents will be ready by tomorrow, but I'm not going to stop painting just because it makes some board members nervous." Victoria Myers studied him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly. "You've changed," she said finally. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't quite a compliment either. "Yes," Henry Winston agreed simply. "I have." That evening, Henry Winston and Noah Carter sat at their kitchen table, sharing a quiet dinner of pasta and garlic bread. The painting, nearly complete, waited in the study like a presence in the house, something alive and meaningful that demanded acknowledgement. Noah Carter twirled spaghetti around his fork, glancing occasionally at his father. Finally, he spoke. "Dad," he said softly, "I think Mom would want people to see it. The painting, I mean." Henry Winston's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, considering his son's words. "You think so?" Noah Carter nodded. "She always believed in sharing art. That's what you told me, remember? And now, well, this painting has both of you in it. Both your stories." Henry Winston dabbed his mouth with a napkin, buying time to gather his thoughts. "I've been thinking about that," he admitted. "About showing it somewhere. But I'm not sure how. It's been so long since I've been part of that world." "But you're part of it now," Noah Carter said, his eyes bright with conviction. "You've made something beautiful, something that matters." Henry Winston reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Must be all those fancy restaurants you take me to," Noah Carter replied with a grin, breaking the tension. They finished their dinner in comfortable silence, both aware that something significant was shifting. Henry Winston's phone buzzed twice with messages from Victoria Myers, but for once he didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, he listened to his son talk about his day at school, watched the way Noah Carter's hands moved expressively as he described an art project, and felt with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. Henry Winston's fingers hovered over his phone for several minutes before he finally dialed Evelyn Brooks's number. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his study as he waited, his heart beating a touch faster than usual. "Henry?" Evelyn Brooks's warm voice carried through the line. "What a lovely surprise." "Evelyn," he said, clearing his throat. I've been painting again." The words came out softer than intended, almost like a confession. There was a moment of delighted silence before Evelyn Brooks responded, "Oh, Henry. That's wonderful news." Her voice held no judgment, only genuine joy. "It's actually, well, I've completed one of Charlotte Carter's unfinished works," Henry Winston explained, his free hand absently touching the edge of the canvas beside him. "I was wondering if you might know of any small galleries that would consider displaying it. Nothing grand, just somewhere quiet, dignified, a tribute to her memory." "Would I?" Evelyn Brooks's enthusiasm bubbled through the phone. "Henry, I'd be honored to help. Let me make some calls. There are several intimate spaces that would be perfect for this." While Henry Winston spoke with Evelyn Brooks, Miranda Bowen arrived at the apartment with a weathered leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Noah Carter let her in, watching curiously as she spread several yellowed papers across the kitchen table. "These were in a storage unit registered to your mother," Miranda Bowen explained, carefully arranging the documents. She had quite a vision, Noah. Look at these notes. Noah Carter leaned forward, his eyes scanning the handwritten pages. Charlotte Carter's flowing script detailed plans for an exhibition she'd titled Second Chances, a celebration of renewed dreams. The margins were filled with enthusiastic annotations about supporting artists who had lost their way, but found their path again. She wanted to create a space for people to restart their artistic journeys, Miranda Bowen said softly. People exactly like your father. Noah Carter's eyes grew wide as he read more of his mother's notes. The exhibition was meant to be more than just an art show. It was intended as a testament to resilience, to the power of returning to abandoned dreams. Later that night, after Henry Winston had retired to bed, Noah Carter sat at his desk with determined focus. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his young face as he carefully composed email after email to local galleries. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, pouring his heart into each message. Dear Gallery Director, he typed, I'm writing to tell you about my father, Henry Winston, and my mother, Charlotte Carter. It's a story about lost dreams and second chances. He attached photos of the completed painting, the perfect blend of Charlotte Carter's original vision and Henry Winston's renewed artistic voice. Each email explained how his mother had believed in the transformative power of art, and how his father had finally found his way back to the canvas. As midnight approached, Noah Carter continued his secret campaign. Some galleries were small, others more established, but he wrote to each one with the same sincere hope. He described how Charlotte Carter had never lost faith in Henry Winston's talent, even when Henry Winston had lost faith in himself. Miranda Bowen's discovery of Charlotte Carter's exhibition notes felt like a sign. Noah Carter incorporated his mother's vision into his messages, explaining how fitting it would be to honor her memory while celebrating his father's artistic rebirth. He worked quietly, determined not to wake Henry Winston, each carefully worded email carrying the weight of both his parents' dreams. The moon cast a gentle light through his bedroom window as Noah Carter pressed send on the final email. He sat back in his chair, both excited and nervous about what he had set in motion. Somewhere in the city, these messages would soon reach people who might help make Charlotte Carter's vision a reality, and in doing so, complete his father's journey back to art. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees as Noah Carter led Henry Winston down an unfamiliar street in the Arts District. The boy's excitement was barely contained, though he tried to maintain an air of mystery about their destination. Just a little further, Dad, Noah Carter said, tugging at Henry Winston's sleeve. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone sidewalk as they approached a modest brick building with large windows, currently covered by brown paper from the inside. Henry Winston raised an eyebrow. Noah, what exactly are we doing here? Instead of answering, Noah Carter pulled open the heavy wooden door and gestured for his father to enter. Henry Winston hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. As they moved through the dimly lit entrance, Noah Carter reached for a light switch. Suddenly, the room bloomed with warm, gallery-style lighting, revealing white walls adorned with familiar artwork. Henry Winston froze, his breath catching in his throat. There, arranged with careful precision, were his old sketches from decades ago, pieces he thought had been lost to time. Beside them hung Charlotte Carter's unfinished works, their raw beauty preserved in each incomplete stroke. And in the center of the main wall, commanding attention, was the painting he had just completed, the one that merged Charlotte Carter's vision with his own artistic voice. Welcome to Gallery Chen, a warm voice called out. A woman in her early 40s stepped forward, extending her hand. I'm Gabriella Chen. Your son has told me so much about you, Mr. Winston. Henry Winston shook her hand automatically, still processing the scene before him. I don't understand, he managed to say. Noah Carter stepped forward, his voice soft but steady. I've been writing to galleries for weeks, Dad. Ms. Chen understood right away what we wanted to do. She believes in Mom's vision for an exhibition about second chances. Gabriella Chen nodded, gesturing to the space around them. When Noah shared your story, and Charlotte's dream of creating a show about artistic renewal, I knew this was something special. The grand opening is scheduled for this Saturday evening. This Saturday? Henry Winston's voice cracked slightly. He turned to look at his son, seeing both determination and hope in the boy's eyes. I know it's scary, Noah Carter said quietly, but Mom believed in you, Dad. She never stopped believing in you, and now it's time for everyone else to see what she saw. Henry Winston moved slowly through the gallery, taking in each piece. His old sketches seemed to whisper of younger days, of dreams he'd tucked away. Charlotte Carter's unfinished works held their own kind of beauty, speaking of possibilities left unexplored. And their joint painting, his completion of her final canvas, stood as a bridge between past and present. The public scrutiny, Henry Winston began, his business-trained mind already calculating risks. Will be managed carefully, Gabriella Chen assured him. This is an intimate space, Mr. Winston. We're focusing on the artistic journey, on the power of returning to abandoned dreams, just as Charlotte Carter envisioned. Henry Winston stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by artwork that traced his life's journey. The half-lit space seemed to pulse with potential, with memories, with future possibilities. Fear still coursed through him, fear of judgment, of vulnerability, of failure. But alongside it, a small spark of pride began to glow. Looking at Noah Carter's hopeful face, Henry Winston gave a slight nod. All right, he said softly. We'll do it. Noah Carter's face lit up with joy, while Gabriella Chen smiled warmly. Henry Winston turned back to the paintings, his heart racing with equal parts anxiety and anticipation. The gallery lights cast gentle shadows across the canvases, and in that moment, standing amid the physical manifestation of his artistic resurrection, Henry Winston felt both terrified and strangely, wonderfully alive. In the quiet hours before dawn, Henry Winston sat hunched over his desk, carefully restoring life to sketches he'd hidden away decades ago. His fingers, usually occupied with signing contracts, now danced across paper with delicate strokes. Each drawing seemed to whisper memories of younger days, of dreams too long forgotten. Just a touch more shadow here, he murmured, adding depth to an old street scene. Scattered around him lay dozens of pieces, landscapes, portraits, abstract expressions of emotion, all waiting to be refined for the upcoming exhibition. The morning sun had barely risen when Victoria Myers burst through his office door, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Henry, the merger documents need your... She stopped short, taking in the unusual scene before her. What are you doing? Henry Winston didn't look up from his work. Something important, Victoria. More important than the $50 million deal we're about to close? Victoria Myers' voice rose with incredulity. The board meets on Friday. We need those signatures today. I'll get to it, Henry Winston replied, carefully blending colors on his palette. Victoria Myers slammed her portfolio onto his desk, causing paintbrushes to rattle. This isn't a game, Henry. Either you sign these papers by tomorrow, or I'll push the merger through without you. Your stake will be minimal. For the first time, Henry Winston set down his brush and looked directly at her. Perhaps that wouldn't be the worst outcome. Victoria Myers stepped back as if struck. Have you lost your mind? This is everything we've worked for. No, Henry Winston said quietly, picking up his brush again. This is everything you've worked for. I'm finding something else. You're throwing away an empire for finger painting? Victoria Myers spat the words out. Henry Winston continued working, his steady hand adding careful details to a sketch. Victoria Myers stood frozen for a moment, then turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving the merger documents behind. At the gallery, Noah Carter worked methodically, arranging pieces with careful consideration. He positioned Charlotte Carter's unfinished painting in the center wall, where soft spotlights highlighted its haunting beauty. Henry Winston's completed portion seemed to dance with his mother's original work, creating something entirely new. Henry Winston arrived later that afternoon carrying his newly refined sketches. He paused before the central painting, the piece that had started everything. In its swirling colors and bold strokes, he saw his past, present, and future merging together. Noah Carter approached quietly. "The lighting makes it look alive," he observed. Henry Winston nodded, clutching his portfolio of restored sketches. The weight of Victoria Myers's ultimatum pressed against his thoughts, but here, surrounded by art, the choice felt surprisingly clear. His empire of wealth suddenly seemed hollow compared to this moment of genuine creation. "Let's hang these new ones," he said firmly, opening his portfolio. His voice carried no regret, only quiet determination. The business world he'd built might crumble, but standing before Charlotte Carter's painting, Henry Winston knew he was finally protecting the right dream. The gallery hummed with anticipation on opening night. Crystal champagne flutes clinked as elegantly dressed patrons moved from piece to piece, their whispered conversations echoing off the pristine walls. Henry Winston stood near the entrance, his usual confident posture slightly softened by nervousness, while Noah Carter stayed close to his side. "Mr. Winston, I never knew you had such talent," remarked an elderly art collector, studying one of Henry Winston's early sketches. Others nodded in agreement, their eyes moving between the delicate lines of his restored works and Charlotte Carter's bold, unfinished canvases. Victoria Myers appeared unexpectedly, her expression unreadable as she examined a particularly emotional piece. She caught Henry Winston's eye but remained silent, slowly making her way through the crowd. Gabriella Chen, the gallery owner, moved gracefully among the guests, explaining the significance of various pieces. "Notice how the styles complement each other," she said, gesturing to where Henry Winston's work merged with Charlotte Carter's final painting. "It's a conversation across time." As the evening progressed, the crowd grew larger. Business associates who had known Henry Winston only as a stern corporate figure now saw him in a new light. Some approached with genuine curiosity, others with barely concealed skepticism. Near the end of the evening, Gabriella Chen gently tapped a glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you would gather here." She gestured toward a curtained area at the far end of the gallery. The crowd shuffled forward, murmuring with interest. Henry Winston placed a gentle hand on Noah Carter's shoulder as they moved to the front. With a nod from Henry Winston, Gabriella Chen pulled back the curtain to reveal a large, previously unseen canvas. Gasps filled the room. The painting was unlike anything else in the gallery, a masterful blend of technique and raw emotion that spoke of both loss and redemption. Henry Winston cleared his throat softly. "This is my latest work," he announced quietly, "completed just days ago." The silence held for a moment before someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause growing stronger as the impact of the piece sank in. Even Victoria Myers, standing at the back of the crowd, brought her hands together slowly. Henry Winston looked down at Noah Carter, tears glistening in both their eyes. He squeezed his son's shoulder, acknowledging without words the role the boy had played in bringing him back to his art. They stood together at the heart of the gallery, surrounded by applause, their shared journey captured in the paintings around them. In the days following the exhibition, art critics from major publications released their reviews. The New York Times praised Henry Winston's stunning return to form, while Art Weekly called his work a testament to the enduring power of creative spirit. Local galleries began reaching out, eager to showcase more of his pieces. Henry Winston sat in his study surrounded by newspaper clippings and emails from admirers when Noah Carter bounded in, clutching the latest review from the City Arts magazine. His eyes sparkled with pride as he read aloud, "Winston's masterful blend of technical precision and raw emotion speaks to a soul finally set free." Overwhelmed by the response and his own sense of liberation, Henry Winston felt tears welling up. Noah Carter rushed forward, wrapping his arms around his father in a tight embrace. "I told you I'd help you find your dream again," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Later that afternoon, Victoria Myers arrived at their home, her usual businesslike demeanor softened by a hint of admiration. She studied the paintings hanging in Henry Winston's study before turning to face him. "Henry," she began, "I've been thinking. The merger doesn't need to be an all-or-nothing proposition." She laid out her new proposal. She would take the lead on the deal, while Henry Winston could maintain a smaller but significant stake. This way, she explained, you can pursue your art without losing everything you've built. Henry Winston considered her offer, watching Noah Carter sketching quietly in the corner. The compromise felt right, a bridge between his past and future. In their newly converted home studio, father and son settled into a comfortable routine. Sunlight streamed through large windows as they worked at adjacent easels, each canvas telling its own story while somehow speaking the same language of hope and redemption. Henry Winston paused his brushwork, taking in the peaceful scene. Noah Carter's concentrated expression, the gentle scratch of brush against canvas, the comfortable silence between them. Setting down his brush, he turned to his son with a warm smile. "All my life," Henry Winston said softly, "I thought I was the one saving you, but you were the one saving me." If you enjoyed the story of Henry and Noah, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.